Welcome to the Commonwealth Club World Affairs of California. I'm Michelle Meow, a member of the Board of Governors and also a producer of a program here called The Michelle Meow Show, which is your A through Z covering the LGBT, LMNOP, and everyone in between. We're really excited for tonight, our special program celebrating National Poetry Month. And I actually have written something very profound and genius for you just for this evening. Roses are red, violets are blue, words are magical, so we hope they stay with you. Thank you. Thank you for entertaining me. That's the first poem I've ever read in my life, like many people. Just a couple of housekeeping things, right? Let's silence our phones. We are recording this, and thanks so much for all of you who are joining us online. If you have questions or comments, we might take them at the end of the evening, depending on the time. But tonight, we are highlighting and platforming our poets and authors. They'll be doing readings, and I know you're all excited about that. To properly kick us off, though, we have a few words from the very own Kate Gale of Red Hen Press, who is also a poet and a publisher, co-founder, and managing editor of Red Hen Press, also an editor for Los Angeles Review. Let's welcome Kate Gale to the podium.
I'm very glad to be here, and we're very grateful to be here at the Commonwealth Club. Always a privilege to be in San Francisco, but especially at a place like this. I just wanted to say that at this time, it is a very challenging time, I think, as many of us know, to be in the arts. It's a very challenging time. We could almost end the sentence there. But the arts, are certainly living on the edge in America, not just because of book banning, but because when we sell books at this time through Amazon, we are being squeezed out by two billionaires. The billionaire that does our distribution, John Ingram, and the billionaire, of course, that owns Amazon. And so all of you who can buy books through indie bookstores, through the websites, you are helping indie presses stay alive. I've been in publishing for 30 years. I've had the privilege of working with Francisco Aragon for 20 years. Is it? Yeah, something like that. We've had a long partnership, and it's been a delight to work with him. And we have now another partnership that we're working on, working with Tia Chucha, and I'm excited to see what we're going to be able to do. The future of independent publishing is going to be more stories, more diverse stories, and more stories by authors who are going to find new ways to get their books into the hands of readers. And I'm excited to see everything that we're going to do. We've got a fantastic team at Red Hen. And as you're going to see tonight, we've got some fantastic authors. We're also very excited to be here with Kim Adonisio. I've long admired her work. I've met her on many occasions, and I know that many of you know her work. So we're very grateful to be here with her tonight. And of course, Kim Dower, who Red Hen has published many of her books and is an amazing poet. I also just want to say that for all of you who buy books, look at the presses that publish those books, find ways to support those presses. Maybe it's volunteering at a reading series, maybe it's helping out at events that they're doing, maybe it's helping out at a literary magazine, but any way that you can be a literary citizen, help keep independent publishing alive. Thank you all so much for being here tonight.
You got some Kim fans in here. We got two Kims, actually. Any more Kims in the audience? Yeah. Well, let's welcome our first reading from Kim Adonisio, who's a poet, author of 9 poetry collections, including Exit Opera, 2 novels, 2 story collections, and 2 books on writing poetry, The Poet's Companion. Let's welcome Kim Addonizio.
Hey, everybody. It's bright up here. I'm going to preface this with a very brief little poem by Bill Knott, which I think is accurate and fear is prescient. It's a brief poem. It's called History, and it's 2 words separated by an ellipsis. So the poem by Bill Knott, History, Hope, Goose Step. And I'm going to start with one that from a blues book I did. It's called Cigar Box Banjo. Blind Willie Johnson could coax music from a single string. God plucked a rib and found a woman. Concert aria in the gypsy song, long groan of orgasm in the first kiss, plastic bag of heroin ripening in the poppy fields. Right now, in a deep pocket of a politician's brain, a bad idea is traveling along an axon to make sure the future resembles a cobra rather than an ocarina. Still, there's hope in every cartoon bib above which a tiny, unfinished skull in its beneficence dispenses a drooling grin. The heart may be a trashy organ, but when it plucks its shiny banjo, I see blue wings in the rain. That's okay. You can just do what William Matthew called a gerbil orgasm, which is you know those little sounds people make at readings? Because otherwise I'm going to feel really badly if you don't clap for another one. This is a New York poem, Blues on Avenue C. At night from my window, I'd watch the liquor store owner drag down his metal door, the spray-painted portrait of his wife materializing above the dates of her birth and death. She had those eyes that follow you around. I couldn't see the stars that winter unless they froze and fell like broken glass. The moon was so high it looked like an overdose. I was so sick with grief, I wanted to stab a streetlight behind its curtain of fog and deliver a mournful soliloquy to a trembling dog under a blank marquee. The stoplights rocked in ruthless wind. Delivery bikes churned through the slushy intersection. A staggering, blanket-clad couple paused to argue beneath the wife's uneven blue eyes, their voices rising up to meet me, full of song and misery. Oh, there you go. You're not a very obedient audience so far. Let's see, I'm going to do this one. These are from that one, and a couple more I'm going to do are from this book, Exit Opera, which is, I think they've got some out in the lobby. It's the latest one. I sort of wrote this in response. I actually said this to someone who got very upset that I said it, and I ended up writing a poem. This too shall pass. Was no consolation to the woman whose husband was strung out on opioids. Gone to a better place, useless and suspect intel for the couple at their daughter's funeral, though there are better places to be than a freezing church in February, standing before a casket with a princess motif. Some moments can't be eased, and it's no good offering cliches like stale meat to a tiger with a taste for human suffering. When I hear the word miracle, I want to throw up on a platter of deviled eggs. Everything happens for a reason. More good tidings someone will try to trepan your skull to insert. When fire inhales your house, you don't care what the haiku says about seeing the rising moon. You want an avalanche to bury you. You want to lie down under a slab of snow, dumb as a jarred sideshow embryo. What a circus. The tents dismantled, the train moving on, always moving, starting slow and gaining speed, taking you where you never wanted to go. Not the happiest poem. So just a couple more. I should say that I'm not with Red Hen Press, although I admire Kate Gale and the press, and I'm very happy to be reading. I guess I'm an honorary hen tonight. So I'm going to do a new one. I spend a fair amount of time with a friend of mine in Tucson, and the desert is always really just the most amazing place, and I always get inspired there. This is called Javelina. Three-toed and stinking in the Arizona sun, coarse-haired, gregarious, pig-like but no pig, it drags the thorny pad of a prickly bear into the shade of a mesquite tree. It clacks its teeth when threatened and fears the coyote. If it were a pig, it would be prized for its meat. If human, shunned for its ugliness. A herd forages on the hotel lawn after a wedding reception, nosing the blown napkins. One night near Waddell Road, a college boy blinded a young red with his headlights, then beat it to death with a baseball bat. Like everything wild, it is sacred and has no beliefs. Bless it anyway. Call it beloved. Bury it among its kind, among the despised of the earth, and honor it. And I'm going to close with this one. This is kind of a mixed book of dark and light. There's also some humor, which I think is a really good way to deal with the darkness. And this is the last poem in the book, by way of a reminder. Even though most of your family is underground, and your shield is made of cardboard, and the backyard is on fire again, it's best to ignore the sirens inviting you to join them, and instead befriend an out-of-tune banjo, a broken swing set, a grounded bee you can nurse with sugar water, or a trip to a sunflower. The many synonyms for dark, they have found me also. I assure you, even the leftovers in the fridge have regarded me with suspicion. Which of us is to be eaten next? Not a question to ask a marauding tiger or incel with a bump stock, but to be fair, any question at all is probably a bad idea in the moment, when it's best to find the nearest wormhole. Mostly, you just need to keep walking deeper into the desert, breaking your spear on rocks, inscribing a few verses on whatever water you can find, even if it's full of bark scorpions breathing through their exoskeletons. Mostly you need a night out, a new coat, a provider who doesn't drop the call in the middle of a sob, maybe some good weed. After that, it's up to the gods, who can't exactly be counted on if history is any predictor, but that's no reason to lose heart. Look, a stray cat has found the recycling bin of empty tuna cans outside on the porch and wants in. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Kim will be back up Kim will be back up after all of our readings for a short, brief talk, and hopefully we'll have time for your questions. Our next poet is Francisco Aragon. He's the director of Letras Latinas and professor of the practice at the Institute for Latino Studies at the University of Notre Dame. He's the author of After Rubin, Glow of Our Sweat, and Puerta de Sal, editor of The Wind Shifts and New Latino Poetry. Let's welcome Francisco.
Thank you all for making time for poetry. Kate Gale and I met in 2009 at the Guadalajara Book Fair, and we've been collaborating ever since. But in 2020, I had the privilege of having a book published with Red Hen Press, but it was my pandemic book. So I gave very few in-person readings, so that's why it's very special to be doing this reading today. I'm going to read 4 pieces, and the first one is from the book, and I'm a native of San Francisco. The title of this poem is Ernesto Cardenal in Berkeley, and it's set in 1982 when I played hooky. The books in my backpack felt lighter walking down the stairs at 24th and Mission. The sky was clear, and I wasn't heading for school. Above, at the station's mouth, a preacher wove Spanish, while beyond him, on the ground, a whiskered man snored through the morning, his trousers soiled. A thought flickered, swayed, Rubén Darío in Madrid, as I rode east along the floor of the bay. Commuters dozed, later did crosswords going home, more of them boarding at Embarcadero, Montgomery, Powell. After the reading, I was a notebook filled. Mamá y papá juntos, a different life billowing inside me. A dusty street in Granada or León, playing baseball, or picturing in history class how Francisco Hernández de Córdoba is led across the plaza he himself had traced out with his sword, beheaded. It's a poem, I think, that tries to imagine what it would have been like had my parents decided not to migrate to San Francisco from Nicaragua in the late 50s. This next piece is a translation from the Spanish of the great late queer Chicano poet Francisco X. Alarcón, who I met in the 1980s at Cody's bookstore and collaborated with him on 4 of his books. This poem of his I'm going to share with you was published in the 90s from a small press down in Santa Cruz called Moving Parts Press. And this particular poem appears in a brand new anthology from the Library of America on Latino poetry. It's from a collection of sonnets that he wrote. He was actually inspired by Federico Garcia Lorca's homoerotic sonnets, and this is sort of his response and his contribution to that conversation. It's from a collection called Of Dark Love, and here is my English version of Francisco's Spanish. I like to walk beside you, stepping on your shadow along the way, letting your steps mark my steps, follow you like a boat being towed, fitting my feet in the footprints you leave, like a puma on the sand. I want to be the towel that dries you, the one you spread to sunbathe. How lucky, the belt that gets to hug your waist, the crucifix that hangs from a chain on your chest. What joy to arrive every day as a comb and smell the morning in your hair, but rather than comb, uncomb you. My book with Red Hen Press includes 10, what I call 10 versions, sort of transcreations from the work of Nicaraguan poet Rubén Darío. What I want to share with you tonight is a new version of his, one that does not appear in the book. It's going to be coming out next year with a literary journal called Huizache. Rubén Darío's original poem is called Marina, I title it Aqua. It's sort of I view it as an homage to the ocean, but as the poem progresses, I sort of read it as a very, very subtle recognition of the violence of colonialism. Aqua. Musical ocean, marvelous ocean, the subtle scent of salt, spectrum and layers of sound, texture of my swaddling days, in which the hours blur into movement, series of soothing steps, leaving me in a trance, bathed. Musical ocean, marvelous ocean of diamonds rising, fragile lace coming apart, mirroring the cities in the sky, blue and white, from which bloom perpetual songs. Father ocean, Mother ocean, spirit unseen, overtaking me. Billowing propulsion, sea expedition of explorers, harassed by fierce cyclical winds. Menace of the most jagged of crags, those golden oar-driven boats, wooden vessels, their purple sails coming upon it. A blue, bellowing bull, and she astride it, riding over the roiling expanse, that sound arresting, the froth, a throng of throngs. Where does it begin? Where does it end? This deity of the sea as arms surface, emerging like swords, slicing through the foam. And then you see it soaking through, rising, falling, a heaving bed of roses. And I will close with a poem whose form was inspired by a Cuban-American poet friend of mine named Emma Trellis. It uses repetition as a vehicle. My poem is dedicated to my husband, though when the poem was written, he was my fiancé. It's called Some Reasons for Dave. Because Iowa raised him, because the snare drum was his globe, because he's retired Air Force, because inter-island is what he flies, because lockdown was a wake-up call, because we mostly Zoomed our first year, because one August day in Maui he sat me down, because he joined me and remained seated, because it was a bench of stone, our backs were to the sea, because that September we went for a stroll, because the lovely view of the dome, because we paused and sat on another bench, because, like him, I didn't get down on one knee. The sun sprinkled its shards across St. Joseph's Lake, because that afternoon I spread him like an eagle, because he sinks into his pool of no return, because I pause for the way he feels while under me, because restraints are another form of freedom, a certain touch is what he craves. Because I embrace it, because I relinquish it, because sometimes I move against him slowly, I reach around and hold him in my hand. Because I marvel at how he grows. Because I'll be 63, he'll be 63 in November. Because my mouth glides across his chest. Because I'll be 57 in December. Our cheeks touch as we drift off to sleep. Because we shower together. Because Sunday night baseball is a favorite date. Because hiking the North Shore is another. Because as a teen he was tenderly shy. Because he still is. Because I picture the moment he becomes a pilot. He is 9 when Mom pulls the yoke, lifting them both into the sky. Thank you very much.
Our next poet doing a reading for us tonight is Kim Dower, who's author of 6 collections of poetry, including What She Wants, Poems on Obsession, Desire, Despair, Euphoria, and I Wore This Dress Today for You, Mom. She's a former City Poet Laureate of West Hollywood. Let's welcome Kim Dower.
Hi, everyone. Is it freezing in here? Yeah, I feel like I want one of those snowsuits. I come from the East Coast. You people don't know about snowsuits, really. But you probably all come from the East Coast. So I feel like I am wearing a snowsuit, actually. So my book that I'm touring with now is my new book called What She Wants. And it's a book, I read a word called limerence. And I don't know how many of you have seen that word, but it was a very brand new word to me. And I was amazed by the word because it is the state of being obsessively infatuated with someone, usually accompanied by delusions of or a desire for an intense romantic relationship with that person, and it's often not returned. So you are in a state of limerence, and I don't know about you, but I certainly have been in that state. And there are actually 4 stages of limerence. This is a psychological description, and I never knew it until I read this. But it's infatuation. I think we've all been there. Crystallization, when it starts to seem like it's coming together, even in your own mind only. Deteriorization, we all know what that's like. And ecstatic release, which I thought, wow, I don't think I've ever felt that, or I'm still waiting for that stage. So I put the book in that form. So the sections are about the 4 stages of limerence. And the first poem in the book, I think that dogs also suffer from limerence. If anybody has a dog, you'll know what I'm talking about, the way they look at you and please don't leave me right now. And so the first poem is called She'll Do Anything for Food. And it's the first line. She'll do anything for food, the dog walker tells me. She speaks quietly, not wanting to insult her heavy-boned, one blue, one brown-eyed beast tugging at her leash. We did a doggy ancestor test, she confides. Discovered she's part wolf, part miniature poodle. Must be the poodle part makes her so ravenous. Small creatures are ruthless feeders. Think of enraptured rats gnawing their way through orange trees, babies nursing, sucking so fiercely they can burst a nipple. Think of your heart, size of a throbbing fist, the part of you that would do anything for love. Oh, here we go. Thank you. But like Kim said, if you don't applaud, I'm gonna rip that poem right out of the book and just throw it in the garbage. I wouldn't really do that. So I know, we could talk about expensive grocery stores, and I'm sure you know those living in the Bay Area. But is there an Erewhon here? Oh, there isn't? Wow. We'll just get ready for that. So your $15 shake that you now get will be $25. Anyway, but I go there because, I want to be healthy. This poem is called Unruly Aura. And this is when you're in the state of limerence. Everything is exciting. Everything is just amazing, even going to the supermarket. Unruly aura. The cashier at the health food store tells me I have a beautiful aura. Wait, I tell her. If you want to see a really beautiful aura, wait until I've taken my Renew Life Ultimate Flora Probiotic. After that, my aura will knock your socks off. She smiles at me and rings me up. My money has a beautiful aura, too. My dollar bills float out of my pink wallet. The man behind me swells from the heat I generate. Every step I take brings me closer to God, the final, fabulous aura. Take my hand, I tell her, squeeze my aura. It's hungry and looking for someone to devour. Thank you. Obsession. She reads that a squirrel's front teeth never stop growing. She will look into this. She will set the record straight. They say poems are autobiographical. I mean, we're hit with that all the time. I'm here to say they're not, except that one is. So in my crystallization part, and I was talking to someone about this book. Someone was interviewing me, and she said, oh, yes, limerence. It starts in the 8th grade, and it ends when you're dead. And I thought that was really perfect. So I grew up in New York City, and I loved the phone booths. And I grew up in the 60s, and I spent a lot of time in phone booths, and we all did then. I mean, they were there on every block, and you could see if there was change left in one, and you could just sort of hide from people. And so when I read that the phone booths were removed from New York, it was like a death in the family. And so I wrote a poem, Ode to the Telephone Booths in New York City. We'd cram ourselves in after school. One more, just one more, okay, you, our shoulders crushed, groping like idiots, cheeks smashed against the glass, one of us with a finger on the accordion door, pour our dimes into the slot, call our mothers to say Donna's for dinner or Joey's to study, then off we'd go to Central Park. Sometimes it was just me and Melissa. Thunderstorms, humidity creeping into the booth. She'd sit on the seat, heavy phone book on the wire swaying between us, while I made collect calls with a fake credit card to random people, the excitement killing us. Senior year, it'd be me alone, excusing myself from my parents' dinner table, running a brush through my hair, elevator down, making the call to my boyfriend, filthy receiver tight in my hand, mouthpiece caked with someone else's spit, smelling like the inside of someone else's mouth, I'd hang up if his mother or sister answered. They couldn't know we were about to meet, walk into the dark opening of the park, find our spot below the American elms that lined the river, my heart pounding, fingertips laced with the sweat of strangers. Yeah, I really miss those phone booths. So I'm going to read one more poem, and this poem, it was actually given to me to write. It was a prompt. There's a wonderful poet named Suzanne Lummis, and she was putting together an anthology called Poetry Goes to the Movies. And it's a wonderful book. It's available now, and she said, Kim, I want you to write a poem. She happens to be obsessed with Michael Caine, like really obsessed with him. And she said, I want you to watch watch the movie Get Carter. I don't know if you know that movie, but it's a great noir film. She said, I want you to watch the movie Get Carter, find one line of dialogue in the movie, and write a poem about that line of dialogue. So we all love a good prompt and a good challenge. So my poem is, the line I found is, you must be joking. I never eat breakfast. So it's the title of the poem. You must be joking. I never eat breakfast, said Michael Caine in Get Carter. Chest bare, lighting up in bed, a cold-blooded killer, the morning after, a one-night stand, a roll in the hay, as my mother's friend Elaine used to say. I wanted to be that woman lying next to him under the covers. Black mascara streaked down my cheeks, wild hair, our legs entwined, seconds away from the men with guns breaking down the door. Why do we like these tough guys? $1 million question for the $1 million movie, which I'd watch every Saturday night on the little black and white when my parents were asleep. Love with the proper stranger. Natalie Wood gets pregnant by Steve McQueen. He marries her, does the right thing, and at 14, I fantasized about going too far in an old Corvette somewhere in Brooklyn or Queens with a guy who looked like Steve McQueen. My mother was relieved we lived in Manhattan. No cars for her to worry about, no tunnels or bridges, no back seats, just the Broadway bus, where nothing much can happen, except you might see someone get on with a bullet hole in his shoulder, like I did, going home from 57th Street after a date with a boy I didn't know. We went to see Prudence and the Pill. I was embarrassed. He was unappealing. And then on the bus, a man with blood dripping from underneath his coat. I used to wonder what a roll in the hay might be like with a murderer. Would he tell me he never ate breakfast? Would he tell me why he killed? Michael Caine went after the men who murdered his brother. Makes sense, I guess. Revenge is popular. If someone set fire to my house, I would find them. I would borrow a gun. Everyone, it seems, has one. I would pull the trigger on an empty stomach. I never eat breakfast either. Thank you.
Let's welcome back all of our poets and also Kim Gale. It's also a poet. I'm sorry, Kate Gale. All right. One more big round of applause for all of our poets tonight who did a reading. We do have time to take your questions or comments, and so Liz will be walking by with a mic. Just pop your hand up, and we'll get to you, and you can direct any of your questions or comments to our fabulous poet tonight. I'll start by saying, yes, thank you so very much. Needed this moment and this opportunity to be with you all and to hear your words and to feel them, especially during this challenging time. Let's pick up where, Kate left off with it being a challenging time, and how has it impacted your work? Are you writing more? Are you cursing more, maybe? I'll leave it at that. Why don't we start with Kim and Inicio?
Cursing more, yeah, I don't know, maybe not writing much, actually, playing a lot of banjo. That's kind of, but I think it speaks to sort of like looking for a creative place to go away from what's happening right now. I think that imagination is really under attack right now. And, artists are not yet directly under attack, but I figure, they're coming for us. In any society that falls apart or that begins to become a dictatorship, which is what I feel is happening here, what I see happening anyway, the intellectuals, the thinkers, the writers, the artists are dangerous to the powers that be. And I've often thought about that because in America we've been so used to being ignored, especially if you're a poet. You're just like, that's kind of like a definition of the poet, is that the mainstream culture doesn't pay any attention to you, and it's both sort of a gift because you're under the radar and a frustration because you're under the radar. And now I'm thinking, well, I kind of want to stay under the radar, but yeah, so I don't know where that leaves us exactly, but just to say that I think a creative space is more than ever important to hold in some way, and to be able to have a space where people's imaginations and people's focus is not on hurting other people and dominating other people, but connecting with other people. And I think poetry and the arts are a space to do that.
Francisco?
It's on? Yeah, okay. I suppose I work in an educational setting, in higher education, and what I try and do is try to be unapologetic in who I am and not pull any punches, as I try to do this evening in my reading, but also try to be a resource for my students, especially I teach at the University of Notre Dame, and our undocumented students feel under siege right now. And so we're trying to be a resource for them. I guess the other way I try to do this is just to try to celebrate joy and celebrate who we are in the way that we can, and not shy away.
Kim?
Oh, God. Is this on? Yeah, this is on. Yeah, I don't even know how to answer that question because I feel one thing that I think a lot of poets, a lot of us feel, is when you're writing something and it comes out and it's flowing and it's joyful, because writing a poem is a very joyful feeling. When you're editing it and changing it, it's not joyful, then it becomes more work, but it's very fabulous work because you're very involved and you're in the zone. But when it first comes out, for me anyway, it's the greatest feeling in the world. It just feels fun and hopeful and energetic. And what's happened to me lately, even though so much has happened in the last 3 months, I haven't had much time to write anyway. But when I have thought of an idea that would normally carry me through in this wondrous way, I stop myself, which I've never done in my life, and I say, who cares? So I'm in the who cares mode when I watch the news, which I try not to do, but you can't help seeing what's going on. And it's the who cares feeling that I have that worries me, because I worry other people are feeling who cares too. And we all hear, does poetry matter? Do the arts matter? Does what we do matter? Can it change the world? And that's such a huge question. I have no idea if it matters. I have no idea if it's going to change the world. But I do know that the joy of creating it, and then the joy people can feel reading it or hearing it changes the world for that moment, you know? And I don't want that to stop. And I wonder how many poets and writers just feel, who cares? What difference does it make? And that's my problem right now.
Yeah, I think I always go back to what Tolstoy said, which is add your light to the sum of light. And I just feel like, change, I mean, what are we going to change? Everything is change all the time. So, but I really hold to that idea, that we're, in some way we're adding to a little bit more light to the world. And that's what we can do. That's all we can do, but that's a lot.
That sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel better already, Kim.
I'm glad, Kim.
I do. I mean, you could be tuning in to the news, and the best words right now offered are, it's going to be amazing. It's really, really good. Just kidding. I'm bad. They're not going to let me back up on this stage. But Kate, to add to that, as a person who's also an artist and a poet, but in this space as editor too, and oftentimes, these roles, you've got to make space, right, for the survival of the arts and for artists. And so elaborate on that. I know you mentioned just a little bit in your introduction, but I just think it's horrible to treat artists in this way in which, somebody's holding the purse strings, and maybe you can, maybe you can't, but let me silence you first. This is a really, really scary time. So talk to us about, creating that space, everything you're trying to do to hold on to the light, of these artists.
Is this on? Yeah. I do think that there's more than one way to ban books. That's part of the point I was trying to make. You can just take them off the shelves, but you can also just make it impossible for certain, for indie presses to thrive or even survive, and that becomes an economic way to just choke it off. But for me, it's. I've given, my husband has, the group of us at Red Hen have given our one wild and precious life to working in the arts. And it's, Toby, our queer manager, likes to say to donors sometimes, I can see that you like to give money to Children's Hospital. Ask yourself what kind of world those kids are going to live in when they get out of the hospital. They need to be in a world where the arts are alive. And what I think about is, if you want to live in a world where the only books that are available are big commercial books that come out of big five presses, then that's one world. I don't want to live in that world. I want to live in a world where indie presses books are available. I mean, we were the first publisher of Chris Abani. We were the first publisher of Douglas Kearney. We were the first publisher of Camille Dungy. So these artists, their start was with Red Hen Press. And so I believe that we are creating a space, a room, a platform for voices and that deserve a space for their stories to be heard. I'll say one other thing. Some of you, I'm sure, have read James, which is now being taught at San Quentin, being made into a movie by Steven Spielberg, and has been on the New York Times bestseller list, as Percival Everett is having a bit of a moment. But he's been writing for 40 years. He has 42 books out, and his two publishers all that time have been Grey Wolf and Red Hen Press. So he's been being published by two indie presses that were small for 40 years. And I mean, we've been around for 30 years. Grey Wolf's been around for 50 years. All that time, two indie presses have been keeping his glorious literary career alive. And now he's got James with a big New York press. But he owes his writing career to indie presses. We all in this room need to make sure the next Percival Everett can find a home for his work, or her work, or their work.
So, a reminder to the audience, we are taking your questions. So, if you have one for any of our poets and also, Kate. Okay, great. Go ahead, George.
I just thought I'd add a little light to the writer's situation. I mean, Boris Pasternak was put down by the Soviet Union for a long time and wrote great poetry, and Dr. Zhivago. And many other writers during that whole time felt oppressed. But they also missed the oppression once it was free because people didn't pay as much attention, just as you were saying. And I think it's really important as a writer to think that your voice reaches 10 to 10,000 people or whatever, and that you just share that way. And not worry too much. I mean, obviously, no one's in it for the money. So don't worry too much about exactly how much there is, but keep expressing yourself. It just reminded me of that because I studied the Soviet Union, and it was just a totally different place.
Why does he think we're not in it for the money?
Thank you so much for being here. This is really wonderful. It's like what we need for our hearts and souls. I'm curious, JFK said, I think I'm going to misquote him, when power corrupts, poetry cleanses. And I'm wondering about what y'all do as writers to kind of eliminate the noise of the world that's going on. Would you share a practice you have when you sit down to write to maybe settle yourself and stay calm and, I don't want to say clean, but you know what I mean.
A bottle of wine.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, I don't know. I don't usually. Sometimes when I'm stoned, I feel like I have a lot of great ideas, and I often will text myself if I don't have anything else on me but my phone, and the next day most of them don't work out, but one out of 30 or 40 does, so I keep doing it. But no, I think it's just a process like any noise you're trying to shut out, whether that's the noise of all your job or your commitments or your family or whatever else is keeping you from the page. I think it has to do with for me it's just closing the door. It's the fabled room of one's own, and it's closing the door, and I have my own studio with my lights, my colored lights, and I always put them on, it's almost like I can't write unless I got the colored lights going, to quote Stanley Kowalski. For me, it's just really carving out, a space of my own and feeling like it's my creative space, and my things are around me, and the things that I want to look at are there, and I close the shades. I don't look out on a window. And for me, that's part of it. I've written in a closet before. I've had my studio in a closet when that was all the space I had. And I didn't care because I'm just so focused on shutting out everything outside of that room. So that's what works for me, but it's different for everybody.
I'll just say that for me, it's the opposite of that. I mean, I do have my own space, so I can go into it, but I like the stimulation. I write when I'm stimulated or hear something. I shut out the news because that's not going to give me any ideas. But in terms of anything else, if I overhear a conversation, I watch something happening, I read something in the paper that's funny, that's what gives me a lot of my ideas. So I do like to look out the window. I love a view. I love to watch things as I write. Sometimes I'll even just watch people on the street and type like I'm at a piano and just record what I see. So I like that stimulation. And if I was alone and it was quiet, I know a lot of people, will light a candle before they start working. I couldn't bear that. I mean, I once tried to light a candle and I thought, no, this is going to kill me. I don't know. I couldn't deal with the candle at all for a writing thing. So I'm sort of the opposite. I need a lot of stimulation, and it helps me. Somehow my mind gets quiet when it's noisy outside. Is that crazy? Francesca, is that crazy?
No. In recent years, I've been really finding inspiration from other artistic disciplines. I love going to museums, even other texts, and translation has been a great resource for me. But translations that I've been doing in recent years are more liberal, more imitations than translations. And so I find stimulation from other works of art. That's what I've been interested in recently.
I'm so interested that Kim has the news on in her house, because that would be terrible to me.
No, I don't have the news on.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
No.
Oh, okay. I don't, it's not like just that I don't have the news on when I'm writing. I never have the news on because there isn't a television hooked up in my house. When I bought the house a long, long time ago, there was a cord out, and I shoved it back in the wall and then mudded over and painted it. I do think that this is a great question, because I think that sadly we might all be old enough that we remember when the biggest distraction was just sort of your life. And I actually think that the biggest distraction is all of our phones. And that if you can't shut your phone off, then you really can't be a writer. That's my theory, at least. So I think that writing is when your intellect and your imagination get to meet, sort of in the clearing in the woods, as Toni Morrison would say. And so because this is what I tell my kids, by the way, I tell them that I have a huge brain and that it's working all the time. But the fact is that my brain is wheeling. And so to write, I have to do a little bit more like what you're doing. I have to chill and sit down and quiet myself. And I usually read and think and calm down, bitch. And then I can get to writing. Because in my normal state, I wouldn't be able to write because I'm wheeling. I am a machine working on making Red Hen happen. And that takes all the Kate energy there is. And so I have to move into a different kind of a space. And I do think that the space in which great writing or any decent writing happens is a different space than the brain that creates literary culture. I think you have to move. Just like, Francisco and I have both done teaching, that's a different brain set. And so you have to move, to me, into a different space. And I'm a big fan of the whole calm down, quieting oneself.
Yeah, but I think the thing too is that everyone has a different process, and there's no one, there's no one way. There's just your way. Yeah. There's everybody's individual way, and I think as we're somewhat older writers, and we've probably gone through a lot of different kinds of writing schedules or writing routines or throughout our lives.
Yeah, if you talk with different people, I had a time when I wrote very early in the morning, and I've done the evening writing, in the middle of the night writing, different times and like that. And because your cycle of your life changes and like that. But yeah.
Get another question from the audience.
Hello. First of all, this is a great panel. It should be on television. Francisco, you recited a poem that you translated from Spanish to English. And one of the impacts that poem had on me is I want to read it in Spanish, which is really weird because I should speak Spanish by now, but I don't. But hearing you recite the poem in English, it made me really want to know that poem. And this is not a question, it's more of what I hope is a prompt. Can you talk about just what you went through with that particular poem? Because I really enjoyed hearing the translation.
Which of the two?
You did two.
So there was the sonnet, there was Francisco X Alarcón, and there was the one Aqua,
It was the first one, yeah.
first one.
Yeah.
Well, with Francisco X Alarcón, as I think I'm sure I mentioned it here, I met him when I was an undergrad at UC Berkeley in the mid-'80s. He was giving a poetry reading at Cody's bookstore from a manuscript entirely in Spanish, and he was so generous that we went and had coffee afterwards. And at the time, I was working for the Berkeley Poetry Review, and I asked him if he would submit some of those poems and maybe let me have a crack at translating his poems. And he, a week later, sent me the whole manuscript, and that got me, in some ways, he got me started in translation. This would have been in 1985 or 86. I will say that my trajectory as a translator, so that first poem I read was more when I'm trying to be more faithful to the original grammar and syntax, but the second poem that I read, Aqua, I'm taking more liberties. So I sort of view translation as a way to be creative, but at the same time using the original source material as inspiration. What I do with Rubén Darío's poems in some circles perhaps would be frowned upon, but I feel like I have personal license because of my background. My parents migrated to San Francisco from Nicaragua in the late 50s, and I've been reading Rubén Darío since the 80s. I lived in Spain for 10 years and read him in Spanish. My undergrad degree was in Spanish literature. So I feel particularly personal connection to that work. So I feel like giving myself permission to explore within that work. And my hope is that I'm recreating a viable poem in English. That's ultimately my goal. So I actually veer away from the term translation more and more, but that's just me.
Awesome. We have time for maybe one more question if you have it in the audience. Otherwise, I'll close us out.
I just, in response to that, I'm interested in hearing what you're veering away from translation to what? I mean, how would you describe what you're veering away to?
I'm trying to write a poem in English. I'd like the poem to sound as if it were written in English, but at the same time explicitly acknowledging that the poem I'm reading would not exist without the original Spanish, I guess is what I would say.
One of my last questions for all of you would be, this awkward time that we're living in which reality is being distorted, history is being rewritten and maybe even, destroyed as far as like what people have written, their accounts of it, whether through the creatives or, historians themselves. I think, in writing, there's so many ways, if you look through history, that we put the work out there and people receive it differently, whether through a creative lens, imaginary lens, we're using our own, perspective on this, right? But there's truth to it. During this time where the truth is being filled with lies and it being distorted, I mean, is there a part of you that thinks that, in writing, there is a way in which we can screw the rules a little bit here and that it could reflect a whole new different way of writing or a birth of different writing as we try to bring the truth back out from all these lies that are being told? That was a really, really hard way of saying, look, there's a lot of lies and misinformation and all this new different way of sharing thoughts and perspectives on it, like social media and stuff. But for true writers and creatives like yourself, do you find yourself to want to address the lies through your writing in a creative mind? Is it changing the way you're writing? Share with us kind of like a futuristic response for young writers who are living through this time and their creatives might be impacted.
I guess I can jump in. Yeah, I mean, you know, the kind of books that Red Hen strives to publish and that I'm looking for are books that speak to the truth of the writer's experiences. I think Francisca and I are really excited about Adela Najaro's work. And so I feel that people are continuing, writers are continuing to gift readers with their own, personal experience. We have a book coming out with a writer named Hannah Sawyer that's called Dreams in Which I'm Almost Human. And she's in a wheelchair, and she writes about her realizing that she was queer, and she realizes it, later than you would have, partly because her primary experience is being in her body and being in this wheelchair and that experience. And I think that, I want to think that readers will read this and that it will change something about them. It'll change something about their experience of the world. And every time that happens, I feel like we're waking someone up. Again, our queer editor is fond of saying, when she'll meet someone, and she has some sort of a kind of raw experience with them, and I'll say, how you doing? And she'll just say, okay, I'm going to give them a chance to change their mind about me. And that's what I think about every book we're publishing. It gives readers a chance to change their mind.
And you don't have to answer the question. It was really, really tough. It was just more of like, is there a new, wave of writing that's coming up now because of everything that's happening?
Go ahead, yeah.
Getting back to the classroom, when I'm teaching students, what I find myself emphasizing more and more these days is telling my students that they bring themselves and their own lived experience to these various texts. And they should view these texts as invitations, almost collaborating with the writer and viewing these texts through their own particular lens, and not be intimidated by trying to decipher what's the correct interpretation of this poem or that story. And so I sort of view that as my contribution of trying to empower them to bring themselves to the text and then co-collaborate with the writer.
Yeah, I think what you're asking also is the way the world is now. Are we changing the way we write in response to how the world is? And I can't say that I am, but it goes back to my answer before about who cares, because when things come out that I would ordinarily write, I am censoring myself by thinking, who cares about that? And I think that that's dangerous, because I can't say we as writers, because I don't know about we as writers. Me as a writer, all I can offer anyone or myself is the truth of what's coming out in my work. Telling the truth of what I see, whether it's, a dog walker saying she'll do anything for food, that's my contribution at that moment. And, we've talked about a poem is about one thing, and then it's about the other thing. And, that poem is about other things besides that dog walker. But maybe in our minds, all of us, as people living in this world, we're coming out with poems honest to ourselves and our experience, but there's something underneath that answers your question, because we're not immune to what's happening. Even if we don't watch the news, we still know what's going on. And somehow we're filtering the truth in our words about what's happening. But I'm not a political poet. And I remember once talking to the great poet Stephen Dunn, if you all know his work. And he told me, when he was a young poet living through the Vietnam experience, he could not write a poem about Vietnam. He could not write about the war. He didn't want to be a political poet. He had nothing to offer what was going on. But when you read his poems from that time, even though they're about things that have nothing to do with the war, they are totally about the war. And I think that may be happening with our work. Maybe a poem I'll read a few days after I write it, I think, wow, where did that even come from? Well, it's coming from what's going on, but it's not about what's going on.
Wow.
Yeah. I think we're here to wake people up and to incite empathy. And I think empathy is a political act, probably a left-leaning political act, because in fact the right has even talked about how empathy is a bad thing to have for people, and they're very much into this idea. I mean, it's like, hello, Howard Rourke. Once again, Ayn Rand raises her head. I don't know. So I just feel that wherever we're coming from as writers and as creators and as also people who help to bring creators to an audience, that's what we're doing. We're just trying, hopefully, and I think that is a form of resistance.
Everyone, please, big, huge round of applause for all of our poets, Kate Gale, Kim Adenizio, Francisco Aragon, and Kim Dower. Thank you to Red Hen Press for making this program happen. Thank you to the Commonwealth Club World Affairs. If you enjoyed tonight's program, consider becoming a member. You can do that right outside. Also, we have books tonight and book signings, so let's get that started. Thank you again for being here with us for National Poetry Month.